And it's BBO War, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. This week on Cooper Friday, I am joined by a guest named Pat Boland, and she's going to share a lot of observations about the D.B. Cooper case with us. And Pat, are you there?
I am here. Nice to see you, Ned. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on the show.
You're welcome. And would you like to give the audience an introduction as to who you are and how you became curious about the D.B. Cooper mystery?
Sure. Well, actually, I'm old enough that I really remember when D.B. Cooper actually jumped out of the plane in 1971. I can't say that I've been super overly interested in it other than the usual watching a Netflix or History Channel special. It was probably a few years ago during COVID when everybody was looking for things to do that I decided to watch a special and order a book, and I was completely and totally hooked. I almost consider this to be my full-time job now. So I got up to speed pretty quickly. I've been to two CooperCons, which is the annual November event where I presented last year. I've been on several different shows, radio or internet shows, and it's kind of my passion. It's just I'm hooked on the case. I don't know what else to say other than it's become somewhat of an obsession.
Okay, and before we say anything else, I have to know which book was it that pulled you into the Cooper Vortex world?
Well, I think the first book I read was actually the Jeffrey Gray book, which is, I guess, Skyjack. I'm actually looking at a pile of books here, Skyjack. And then I read Bruce Smith's book, which is sort of was the Bible of the book of the world forever. And he's updated it, but a lot of new things have happened since those books came out that, they're still very readable and so interesting, and I would highly recommend them. But a lot of things have really changed since those books came out, mostly because we have access now to all the FBI files, thanks to someone suing the FBI and winning. They had to release, which they're still doing. There's tens of thousands of pages of FBI files on this case, which is still open. A lot of people think the case was closed in 2016, but we have found out recently that it actually is still open. I'm not saying that they're, spending a lot of effort on it, but it is not closed. It is still an active case. So now that we have all the what they call 302s, which are the forms that an FBI agent would fill out, kind of their paperwork. Now that we have those, we know a whole lot more about the case than we did when some of the early books were written or some of the early TV specials were written, like Unsolved Mysteries and some of those that were on several years ago.
Okay, though, Pat, just in case, some way, somehow, if somebody has clicked on this link and they have not watched any of the previous Cooper Fridays or they haven't watched any of the previous D.B. Cooper material online, who was D.B. Cooper?
Well, D.B. Cooper actually wasn't D.B. Cooper. I mean, it was a gentleman on November 24th, 1971, that got on a short flight the day before Thanksgiving from Portland, Oregon, up to Seattle. Right after the plane, it hadn't even taken off yet. It was still taxiing on the runway, slipped one of the young stewardesses, and I will call them stewardesses because that's what they were called back then, that he had a bomb and wanted $200,000. And the flight, of course, they circled for a while they were gathering the money, and he asked for 4 parachutes. And they finally landed in Seattle. He let everyone off except, of course, the 3 in the cockpit and one of the stewardesses, Tina. And they took off again. He wanted to go to Mexico, but the flight configuration he gave them, which was to fly basically low and slow, they used up a lot more fuel than they would have normally under normal conditions. So they told him they needed to make a pit stop, which they did in Reno. Of course, by the time they landed in Reno, he was gone. He had jumped out of the plane, and he has never been seen or heard from again. The FBI spent 45 years, and I can't even imagine how much money and manpower. And basically, we have no more information today than I think we did on the day of the hijacking. We have absolutely no idea who he is. So this is considered to be one of the three most intriguing mysteries in the US, being Amelia Earhart, Jimmy Hoffa, which I think we pretty much know what happened to them, but we don't know what happened to D.B. Cooper. He is everyone and he's no one.
Okay, wow, that's a very good introduction. But also, I recently appeared on the show The Cooper Vortex, and you've been a guest as well, hosted by Darren Schaefer. He does a great job. And you actually contacted me because you said there were some things that you wanted to dispute, where there were lots of points that you disagreed with. And do you want to just get into that right now?
Well, sure. Of course I did. It's funny because I disagreed with a lot what you said in the first half, and then I contacted you, and then by the second half I was agreeing with you. But I think what I don't like about the case is the glamorization and the idea that there were no victims. And yes, no one was killed. Thankfully, no one was physically injured in this because the passengers oddly never knew they were being hijacked. So the only people who knew about it were the crew. So nobody decided to be, Rambo or something and take out this guy. They all got off the plane thinking that there was a mechanical issue. I guess I didn't agree with you saying, well, nobody got hurt. So, it wasn't really that big of a deal. And, there's a lot of glamorization of this guy. I think, and I'm not going to be sexist in saying this, but I think a lot of men kind of think he's like super cool. This guy stuck it to the man, which was kind of this was the Vietnam era, a lot of social upheaval. And I think a lot of people looked at him sort of as a folk hero. There's a lot of songs about D.B. Cooper that, he was the guy that, got away. He was the sort of the anti-hero type. But I don't look at it that way because I think he was nothing more than just a con man criminal. And just because no one was physically hurt, I think the crew will tell you that this was something that affected them for a very long time. So there were victims, just in a different way. So I don't glamorize him. I think he's and back then a lot of people don't know, in 1971 air piracy was actually a federal capital offense. So if D.B. Cooper had been caught and tried immediately, now a few months later the Supreme Court actually overturned the death penalty, but the day that he hijacked this plane, he would have been subject to the death penalty, even though nobody was killed. That was that could have been his sentence. So that was one of the things I think I didn't agree with you on. But I like some of the other things that you talked about. Interesting. I think about I'm super interested in who this guy was, like psychologically, because according to the witnesses, he was an older guy. Now there were a lot of copycats after Cooper. This was the only unsolved hijacking in U.S. history. So I think that's important to remember because a lot of people criticize the FBI a lot that they didn't do a good job or they did well. I don't know. I think there were a lot of hijackings back in the day, and so this was the one that got away. So that to me is not really a fair statement, because he was the first. He was the unicorn, and the guys who tried the same jump after him, we call them the copycats. There were several. They were either they were all young guys, except for one who was doing it for political motives, which that's a whole different ball game. But these were young guys, either Vietnam vets with PTSD or, had mental health issues. One guy was like so drunk he could barely stand up. So Cooper was just different. He was older, and I think that's what makes him so strange, especially back in 1971. Being 45 to 50, I mean, you were kind of old. Back now, right now, it's like, Tom Cruise is 60 something, but he looks like he's 30 something. But it was not like that back in 71. So Cooper he's really an oddity and a curiosity for many reasons, and one of them really being his age. But I did like as I recall, you said that you thought he probably had previous experience with skydiving or parachuting and also some aviation experience, which I think is totally correct. I know you've done a couple of episodes on some of what I call the usual suspects. Kenny Christensen is definitely not Cooper. Spoiler alert on that one. For many reasons, he's not. And E. Howard Hunt, I listened to that today. Really super interesting. I don't think he's Cooper, but he's a more interesting person as Cooper.
Okay, yes, though, and to follow up with some of those things, you were referring to some questions that I was asked about, like, what did I think about people celebrating certain things about the Cooper case? And I, as you correctly stated, when I was on the Cooper Vortex, I said, well, D.B. Cooper didn't kill anyone, so I thought it was okay. But a follow-up with that would be, you have said that you attended 2 Cooper cons, which is an event that marks the anniversary. And why would you attend something like CooperCon if you think it's not good to celebrate D.B. Cooper?
Well, actually, that's a good question. And, back in the day, years ago, they actually used to there was a store, the presumed landing zone for Cooper has really evolved over time. But back in the day, people thought he landed in Ariel, Washington. So there was kind of an old bar there, and they would have wild parties there every year. People would dress up as Cooper, they'd wear T-shirts, and it was just kind of a drunken brawl kind of thing. In fact, if you watch some of the old specials, you'll see they feature some of the video from there. The place does not exist anymore. CooperCon actually is different. It really is not in any way a celebration of him as a hero. It is really, I would say, more of an intellectual exercise on things like, because we have very limited evidence, but we do have some evidence. For example, Cooper was wearing a clip-on tie, which he left on the plane. We don't know why, but he left that on the plane. He had 4 parachutes. 2 of them are missing. One, obviously, he was wearing. The other one, we're not sure. He threw it out, or we don't know what he did with it. But there are 2 parachutes that were left that are evidence, because we know that he touched those. There's also a boarding pass. So a lot of this is really the examination of DNA, because that's new. Obviously, in 71, nobody knew about DNA. My presentation last year was about the parachutes, and my feeling that with modern technology, which is unreal. I mean, I have spoken at length with forensic genealogists about this, and Cooper's DNA is probably on those parachutes. So that, with the right, again, you know how that works with like the Golden State Killer, where you get the DNA and then they do like this huge family tree, and they got, it's a process, but I mean, it's being done every single day. So it's not a celebration. It really is digging into the flight path. Last year, actually, interestingly, we had a gentleman who did hijack a plane after Cooper did, who spent over 40 years in federal prison. And he was interviewed, and that was pretty interesting on everything that went wrong in his life that made him decide to do that. So no, I don't look at it that way, that that I'm not dressing up like DB Cooper or pretending he's a hero. It really is an examination of what evidence do we have? What do we need to do? The tie is, that's been a really interesting thing with, again, with modern technology, that they have been able to identify an unbelievable amount of weird particles on that tie that you and I would never come in contact with. Titanium, pure titanium, and all sorts of really strange things, which is pointing a lot of people in the direction that he must have worked in some sort of lab environment where he was doing experimenting with things that actually really didn't exist. In other words, putting together compounds. There's one gentleman who's a popular suspect that he actually held the patent for some of these odd particles that are on the tie. So that's been a whole avenue. I am not a science person, but we have science people involved in this. So they're kind of looking at that. So, you know, in a way, people always ask me, do you really want to solve this case? And, you know, part of me is like, yeah, I really do. And the other part is, well, I don't know. It's just, it's kind of interesting digging into all these things. Like, I never knew anything about parachutes, like zero. And then I had to get up on stage and do this presentation. And so it was just stuff I never knew about before. And it was actually pretty interesting. So now, to sum it up, we are not celebrating DB Cooper in any way. There's no such thing. It really is more of a gathering of a lot of people, even some that come from foreign countries, who are just super interested in the case and would like to meet up with other people and talk about things like flight paths, which makes us all sound a little crazy, but maybe we are. I don't know. What do you think? What got you interested in DB Cooper? Can I ask you that?
Oh, certainly. And for me, it was mostly because of the audience of Black Box Online Radio here, and I talk a lot about the Zodiac Killer. And there are people who follow both cases, and they were just sending me questions about, like, hey, have you heard the latest DB Cooper news? And at first I was like, no. And then, I just started looking into it more and more because other people kind of pulled me into the vortex, so to speak. And that's kind of where I am now, and no turning back until ultimately we get the answers. And I think that's a very good answer that you gave about how you're not trying to glorify Cooper in any way by attending these events. Because as I said, I follow mysteries like the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper, and I don't think those are glorifying the individuals in any way. You want to solve the mystery, right? And that's mostly what it's about, getting the truth, getting answers. And also, these are crimes where somebody got away, and there's a reason why people want them solved. It's not purely just having that moment where you connect the dots and think, oh, I put it together, I'm the one who figured it out. No, a lot of people, and you can see this in the comment section on multiple Cooper videos or any unsolved case, they actually want the truth, and they're not doing it purely for a self-serving reason. But
no. Now, that being said, there probably are some people who think they're going to solve it and make a lot of money off of a Netflix special or something. I'm not one of those people, and that if they do, good for them. But yeah, it's a mystery, just like you say, Jack the Ripper or anything else. But the difference with this mystery is the fact that there are no quote unquote victims, in the sense that most of these other true crime, and I know there's a lot of true crime podcasts, and typically they do involve a dead body. I mean, but this one doesn't. So that makes it unique. I mean, a lot of people think Cooper died in the jump. I never thought he did. I have to say, recently, I'm kind of wondering about that a little bit more. I know a lot of people say, well, somebody would have been reported missing or whatever, but that is not true. I mean, there's a whole thread on the missing, especially back then. I mean, there were guys who went to the grocery store to buy a pack of cigarettes and never came home. and their family didn't even bother reporting them missing. They thought, good riddance, we're glad he's gone. So not necessarily would someone have reported him missing. I mean, looking through statistics on, believe it or not, skydiving is extremely safe, even in wartime. I mean, the casualty rate is really very low. And certainly in sports skydiving, it is. So if he was able to pull the cord, I mean, he probably survived. The thing that's odd, though, is he does have that money strapped to him, which could have made him off balance and spun out. But I think this guy, this was not his first rodeo with being either a paratrooper. I know you touched on a little bit, and maybe it was one of your shows about Air America. And I don't know if I guess you have kind of looked into that a little bit. Are you familiar with Air America, or do you know what that is?
Just a little bit, and I also follow Drew Beeson's channel. He's the author of
Okay.
Paratrooper Fortune, and I've talked to Drew a lot about the D.B. Cooper case. He has a suspect named Ted B. Braden. That's for the audience. I know you know all this, Pat. You've been a guest on Drew's show, and you talk all the time. But as far as Air America goes, they were the ones that had some very specific information that was very similar to the way the language that D.B. Cooper used on the plane. I actually saw your interview that you did with Drew Beeson, where you thought that there were a lot of clues that looked like Air America could have been an influence on D.B. Cooper. And would you like to give the audience an introduction?
Yeah, yes, Air America, again, just the simplification of it. There were a number of airlines that were owned post-World War II by the CIA, actually, but they were called things like Civil Air Transport and Southern, and they had real nice names. For simplicity, we'll just call them all Air America. But they were actually operating covertly in parts of the world where our government was telling us that we were not operating. So that was pretty much their role. So obviously 71 was the Vietnam era. So they were operating over in Laos and Cambodia, which again, our government was telling us we were not there, but we were. I had the privilege of actually interviewing on another podcast one of the gentlemen who, there's actually a movie called Air America with Mel Gibson that came out in 1990, and he actually was the main character was based on this gentleman. So that was pretty interesting to get to interview him. But they, in the late 60s, over in Thailand, again, the CIA did a couple of test drops of men jumping out of 727s. So that was kind of interesting, which nobody really knew about until quite a bit later. And it's really been only known about one test drop until very, very recently, which now we're finding out that there were actually two. But what ties this to the Cooper case is that there were very specific flight configurations that were being used on that 727. And those are the exact same flight configuration that Cooper gave to the pilots. Not to mention it was also a 727. Now, one of the things that was odd about Cooper is he didn't know how to open the aft stairs that he jumped out of, and he needed the flight attendant to help him jump out. Well, actually, when the men were jumping out of the 727s in Thailand, there wasn't a door. They had outfitted it with a chute because the plan was not only were they going to drop personnel, but they were also going to drop cargo out. So that's kind of curious too. So I am certainly not the first person to come up with this, because actually just a few days after the hijacking, the FBI was all over this Air America connection. And they were actually interviewing at least one gentleman who was one of the people who jumped in Thailand. And granted, there were only like 7 people on the plane. So it wasn't like this was a big operation. So I feel like they would have figured it out if it had been one of these guys. But, there were mechanics, there were certainly a lot of people involved in this whole compound of people that lived over there, and somebody could have told someone. So is it just a coincidence? I mean, I don't know. Again, it's a very strange connection, but we just don't know.
Okay, wow, thank you for that. And I would just like to remind the audience that I'm talking to Pat Boland all about DB Cooper. And if there are any guests that you would like to have on Cooper Friday, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below. You can also hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And please feel free to visit some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. But for you, Pat, I would like to ask you something. At this point in the discussion, would you rather talk about some of the suspects, or would you rather talk about some of the activities that Cooper was doing? What was Cooper thinking, and his the day of the skyjacking and the events that took place? The events or the suspects? Which one?
Well, I'll be honest about the suspects. I don't think we know who Cooper is. So I don't buy any of the suspects personally. I mean, that's just me. I think if somehow, we had, lightning struck and we knew 100% this was Cooper, I think our jaws would all drop, because I don't think it's anybody we know. And it would not surprise me that, again, I don't want to get into conspiracies, but I know you talked about this,
All the time.
The CIA was doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing in Southeast Asia. And if they did find out that one of their guys told someone, I don't think they would want that known to the American public at the height of the Vietnam War. So that's my feeling on the suspects. But yeah, Cooper's there's so many odd things about him and the way he acted. Tina, who was the stewardess who interacted with him the most, after it was over, she told the press conference that she thought he was rather nice. I mean, he had a bomb, well, or at least a fake bomb. I think the bomb was fake. I mean, he had a briefcase with, some whatever they were, dynamite. Oddly back then, I don't know how it is now, but you could go in a store and buy dynamite. That was kind of odd in most states, not everywhere, but because people used it in farming or, blowing up rocks or whatever. So you could go in and buy dynamite. That was not unheard of. So, probably we've watched TV back then and could have put together a fake bomb. So I think that's real interesting that the stewardesses did not find him so threatening. We have multiple Facebook groups devoted to this, of course, and we were discussing today that the witness descriptions are all over the place. I mean, this guy was either 35 or he was 55 or he was 5'10" or he was 6'2". He was wearing a black suit. He was wearing a brown suit. So that did not help the case. And I think you talked about the sketches too. The original sketch of Cooper, which was done immediately, the three stewardesses were together. It was done by a gentleman who was considered to be one of the premier sketch artists. It's colloquially, I can't say that, called the Bing Crosby sketch, because some people think it looks like Bing Crosby, even though I'm missing that. But anyway, he looks young. And the reason why the FBI went back and changed that sketch at quite a bit later point in time was because they were getting so many tips about somebody like you. I don't know how old you are, but 20-something men, whereas the witnesses said he was possibly at least in his mid-40s. So that kind of threw the whole case into disarray, and that everybody's looking kind of for the wrong guy maybe. But I tend to go with the first sketch just because if we hang up, and I know we're on the radio, but I'm looking at you on Skype, right? If I had to tell someone in an hour what you look like, it would be much more accurate than what I would tell someone next week or next month or next year. So I'm a little skeptical of the age on Cooper. I think he might have been a bit younger than we think he was. I know he was kind of had a receding hairline, but that doesn't knock out a lot of younger guys. Really, only a couple of people saw him without his sunglasses, which is a problem because typically your eyes will give away your age. So I don't think we really know what he looks like, which is a problem. Now, you talked about Ted Braden, who that's another book I would highly recommend is Drew Beeson's book. If Ted Braden wasn't Cooper, he should have been, because he was like the super duper guy that would have done anything for, money or anything, or just the thrill of it. I think he would have jumped out of the plane without a parachute. He was just that kind of guy. So the book is kind of fascinating, but he was of short stature. He was like 5'8", I think. So that has kind of knocked him out because all the witnesses said Cooper was taller. Again, remember that none of the people on the plane knew they were being hijacked. So why are they even paying attention to this guy? So, the stewardesses were all very young, like early 20s. And I think it's hard for a young woman to really estimate a middle-aged man's age. So I don't know. I think that's kind of a problem. And the FBI they investigated over 1,000 men. If anybody's really interested in getting like super into the case, I can't remember the exact name of the website, but if you Google FBI Vault DB Cooper, you will pull up all the information that has been released. I mean, I'll warn you, there's tons of it now. And every month they release more of these 302s. Now, they're pretty heavily redacted because the names, unless they know the person, they can prove that they're deceased. They actually have to redact their name. But some of them are like hilarious, really. It's my ex-boyfriend and, those kind of, he's got to be Cooper. One person claimed that they were watching an old TV show and they saw DB Cooper as one of the extras in the show, and, just a lot of crazy stuff. So, but the FBI, they really did put in 110%. I mean, they immediately interviewed, unfortunately, the man who packed the parachutes really led them astray that the chutes were really sport parachutes, when actually they were not. They were military surplus. So they spent a lot of time going to every skydiving center, every skydiving school, up and down. They interviewed smoke jumpers all up and down the West Coast. That was just turned out to be kind of a big waste of time, because it didn't, nothing really came of it. So yeah, the case is just, I mean, I know why they didn't solve it, really. The point is, can we solve it now? And I think I know how to solve the case. Do you want me to tell you how to solve it?
Absolutely. How do we do that, Pat?
Okay. Well, like I said, there were 4 parachutes on the plane. One of them he jumped with, the other one he tossed out or whatever he did with. But the 2 remaining chutes, one is a back chute, which would be your main chute you would jump with. And the other chute that was left on the plane was a reserve, which that's like your emergency chute you would wear in the front if the other one didn't open. So those are typically not used. They would only be used in an emergency, right? Those are still around. And Cooper spent a lot of time fiddling with those chutes. He pulled out what they call packing cards, which kind of give all the information of the about the chute. And the reserve chute, he actually opened up and he cut out the shroud lines, which would be the big lines, we all see that is attached to the canopy of the chute. And he used those to wrap the money bag around him, the $200,000. So the one chute, the back chute that he didn't use, is actually in the possession of a museum in Tacoma, Washington, where it was actually donated because the FBI gave it back to the owner after they decided they couldn't get any fingerprints off of it. So there's that chute, and then there's the other chute that he touched a lot. The FBI has that. So I think if we could examine, and I tried really hard to get a hold of the chute in Washington when I was there last year. Unfortunately, that did not work out. We talked about it, and then they just decided they didn't want to let us do it. So either that chute or the FBI chute, I think, according to my genealogy buddies, right now, I think you only need like 5 skin cells or something to be able to do all this magic. I think DB Cooper's DNA is on those chutes. So what do you think? How do we get those chutes?
Well, how do we get them? It sounds like you encountered some types of bureaucratic roadblocks, and I'm really surprised that they would not want to make them available for testing when DNA is going to be the way to solve multiple cold cases. Countless cold cases would be solved via DNA, because even things like deathbed confessions, not necessarily reliable. And as Darren Schaefer likes to talk about, there are countless DB Cooper confessions when someone is admitting to DB Cooper, to being DB Cooper. And also things like fingerprints seems like they've mostly been destroyed, like the evidence that should have had Cooper's fingerprints has either been destroyed or not well preserved. So other than DNA, I don't have a lot of answers to that. But I do have to...
Well,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to some of the things that you said about the sketches. Firstly, the composite A that is referred to as the Bing Crosby sketch. I am so glad that you said that, because I never would have thought that that looked like Bing Crosby. I watch his Christmas special every year, on YouTube, where, he's just singing with Frank Sinatra. No, certainly not. And what I really liked what you said in the interview you did with Drew Beeson, composite A is Bing Crosby, composite B is Cary Grant, and composite C is Grandpa Munster. And as you and Drew were both in agreement on, the composite sketches look absolutely nothing alike. If you were to just show me those before the Cooper mystery and be like, do you think that there's a chance that this could be the same person? I would say not only no, but hell no, because you're talking about different nose shapes, completely different hairlines, different jaw lines. Every single thing is different among composites A, B, and C. And where are we going to go with this stuff? Which one do you go with?
Well, I mean, it doesn't make any sense that they're so different. I mean, these were the same witnesses they were talking to. It's not like, well, you said one thing and I said another thing. I mean, Flo Schaffner, who was one of the stewardesses, I mean, she was there when they did the first sketch, and she is the one who saw him without his glasses on, the sunglasses. The other 2 stewardesses did not. But when she appeared on Unsolved Mysteries and did that, had the guy, she said this is him. It wasn't that the man was just not a very good sketch artist. But you're right. It's like a nightmare to me. It's like her memory of him was that he was so scary, because the first guy, he was very bland looking. I mean, Bing Crosby, he was just kind of like a good guy, very, very bland, not particularly handsome, or just sort of an average looking guy. But when she did that sketch years later, it's almost like her memory of him was super, super scary. And I think that also speaks to being victimized, that, years later, that's how she was remembering him. I think he was almost like a nightmare for her, that she remembered him as being just a very scary looking guy. I don't know. I think the sketches certainly didn't do the case any favors, because everybody looked like, we come up with a suspect a week. Okay. I have so many different people I communicate with. And then of course we've got all these Facebook groups. Every week, this is the guy. I can't tell you how many times this is him. And then it's not him, because then we find out, something that just doesn't add up. And anyone to me who does not have any experience with any sort of parachuting, I cannot accept as a suspect personally, because I cannot imagine a middle-aged man is sitting at home at the breakfast table and deciding he's going to hijack a plane and jump out of it. I mean, why would you do that? You know, if you needed the money really bad, well, that's okay. But I would think that, you know, maybe you think of something else. This to me was just very, very, very strange.
So, Pat, if we could continue with this particular discussion, you seem like you have a lot of observations that you've made about how and why Cooper was thinking the way he did. Would you like to give us a basic walkthrough of what you think Cooper did before the hijacking? I'm talking about things like, how did he construct this bomb or a dud? As you said, it could have been a dud. What was the motive? What was he planning to do with the money? Why was the money never found? What happened after Cooper landed on the ground? Would you like to give us a basic walkthrough about what you think Cooper was doing?
Sure. I mean, obviously, we know nothing about him before or after, although we didn't talk about that several years later, a little boy found some of the money on a beach, Tina Bar. That the money was still there, that there was some money found on the beach, that actually they had traced the, they had recorded the serial numbers. So they know that it was from him. How it got there, that's as big of a mystery as the hijacking. But I think we've looked into bus schedules. We've looked into the idea that he flew into the airport. I think somebody had to have dropped him off. That's the conclusion I've come to now, that I think and it might have been an unwitting accomplice. It may have been, you know, because they interviewed every taxi driver. There were airport buses, but they were fairly new. It was a new phenomenon there in Portland. So he had to have been a local, I think, to use the bus. I mean, that to me is very risky, to get on a packed bus with having to sit next to someone. So I don't think he took a taxi. I don't think he took a bus. So how else did he get there? I mean, airports are usually kind of outside of town, so it's not like he walked there. So I think somebody dropped him off somehow. And then afterwards, I don't think anybody would get on a plane and plan to jump out of it without a very good idea of what they were going to do after. So I feel like he had, the Army military talks about these exfiltration strategies. And based on Cooper's age, there's probably a very good chance that he did serve in the military. So I think that he knew, because after all, it was at night. Skydiving at night is a whole other thing from doing it during the day. It was kind of there was a lot of empty land, and there were forests and all sorts of different things where he could have landed. And again, we don't know where he landed because we have no evidence of him after that. So I think he had a plan. Oddly, there were so many strange coincidences of things that happened that night, but there was a store that was broken into very close to where we think he did land. There was a cabin broken into. There was a boat stolen. So they're all, again, all sorts of weird things going on. But I think he might have broken into the store to use a phone. I mean, remember back then we didn't have cell phones. So you either found a pay phone, which there weren't pay phones out in the middle of, the forest or whatever. You'd have to find some sort of civilization. So I think there's a chance. And there was a man that was spotted, again, walking on a road that nobody is ever walking on late that night, wearing a suit, that a woman came forward. And so I think he had maybe had a car stashed somewhere, or, I mean, he definitely had a plan. I just don't think he dropped to that plane and then said, I have no idea what I'm going to do now, because Cooper wasn't stupid. I think Cooper was a con man. I think he had probably done some I'm not saying he had done any, major type of criminal activity, but I think if we knew who he was, we'd find out that he had a shady background. Who knows, bad checks or, kind of low level grifty type stuff. I can totally see him being, because he was a smooth operator. He was not nervous on that plane. And if you read about all the copycats, they were sweating, they were pointing guns at people, they were freaking out. He sat there and had smoked 7 cigarettes and offered one to one of the stewardesses, and she sat and smoked it with him. So he was calm, cool, and collected. And that doesn't sound to me like a guy who's never jumped out of a plane before. I don't know.
Oh, yes, well, certainly still part of the mystery. But this begs the question of, if Cooper was a con man, what happened with the money? Because the money has never appeared in circulation again, right? With the exception of finding the $5,800, but that's not even in circulation. That's been located. But if this was all just a con, what happened to the money?
Well, at first I thought, well, and you brought up a good point the other day too. If you don't ever change your mind in this case, then you're not doing a good job, because you have to evolve in this as new information comes through. There have been several people interviewed, including on Darren's show. Actually, we were lucky enough to have the man who actually drove the money from the bank to the plane. He was at CooperCon last year. So we actually were able to speak to him about this. From what everybody says, including the FBI, yeah, they were looking, there were, $10,000 $20 bills, and they were not listed in sequential order. So they're giving out these, copied, we used to call them mimeographed sheets, to area banks, casinos. Okay, maybe they were looking for them for a short time, but the average lifespan of a $20 bill back then, because it was much more of a cash society, was only a few years. So how long were people really looking for these $20 bills? And the US Mint was not, they were not keeping track of destroyed bills. When money gets old, they take it and they destroy it. They weren't keeping track of the bills back then. So I think he could have spent it without. Now, it does seem a little strange that not one has ever shown up. Maybe that somebody, forgot they had it in a drawer and, happened to look on the internet. But I think it would have been possible. Or he could have gone overseas. I've thought about the fact that, everybody loses sight of the fact that this was Thanksgiving weekend. So why did he pick such an odd day? Maybe he was on some sort of leave. If he could have been overseas. I know the Air America guys, for example, they would come home for a month or more. So somebody could have gotten the money and taken it back and used it in another country. In a lot of places, the good old American dollar, people will take it, even if that's not the currency. So, there's a lot of different things that could have happened to it. Or there's the idea that since it was actually $6,000 that was on Tina Bar. I think they figured out that when they went and, because it went up for auction, that actually there were some little pieces stuck together. So it was approximately $6,000. That, the fact that that was found next to a river, maybe that's where the rest of the money went, along with Cooper. I don't know.
Okay, you said I don't know, but then we have to do a little bit more than that, because you must have some theory on how that money got there. Some hypothesis, some leading idea that you're going with. Some people think that the money ended up there because the river was dredged in 1974. Other people think that D.B. Cooper came back to that location specifically to mark Tina Bar for some particular reason. Maybe it was involved with his exit journey and he buried the money himself as a commemoration. What do you really think happened to that money?
My favorite theory is that it was planted, because a lot of really smart people who know about river currents and all sorts of stuff have pretty much disproven that it just got there by, the flood or some way like that. The other thing that's interesting is we found out that the money was actually packed. $10,000 was packed together. So it's like 3 of the packets would have been taken out of the larger bundle, which is kind of strange. So my favorite theory is that not that Cooper would have buried the money as some sort of, commemoration or sticking it in your eye or anything like that. I don't think so. But I don't discount that that it was planted to throw the FBI off, that he might have died. Because, the FBI, people don't realize it. If you do go back and really look at all the 302s and all the suspects, they really were hot on the trail of a few people that they really thought were Cooper. So it wasn't like these were all the crazy people confessing or, my brother-in-law who I can't stand kind of thing. It wasn't all that. There were some guys that really could be Cooper, and I'm still not convinced, I'm not 100% convinced, but I think if it was one of them, I wouldn't be shocked. So possibly he thought, let's bury a little bit of money. I mean, what odder and better place to bury money to prove that you're dead is next to a river. I mean, that's what everybody kind of immediately thought, right? I mean, that's not just me. It's like, we were right. He's dead, because the FBI always thought he was dead, at least in the beginning. And really the most famous FBI agent was one who has since passed away, Ralph Himmelsbach, who wrote a book about the case. I mean, he was completely convinced that he was, in a hole in the ground somewhere. And oddly, the money was found literally 2 weeks before he retired, which was really strange. So I kind of like that theory that it got there by human intervention. And I can't think of any other reason somebody would bury that money, because we know it wasn't buried the night of the hijacking based on complicated science involving diatoms and all things that I know absolutely nothing about. But the money was not there the entire 8 years. It was somewhere else. So where was it? Was it buried in somebody's backyard? Was it in their attic? So I kind of like that theory, but it could be anything. But that's my favorite theory on how it got there.
Well, this is going to tie into the next question, because where do you think Cooper would have landed? And yes, we can still entertain the possibility that Cooper did not pass away. A lot of people still go with that. They think Cooper died on the night of the jump, but we've estimated the drop zone to be within a specific region. But where do you think Cooper touched down?
Well, right now, the prevailing theory is it's somewhere around Battleground Orchards. I mean, I don't live in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, I always say I'm never going there because there's too many weird things that happen up there between D.B. Cooper and Bigfoot, and there's a lot of weird things. No, I love the Pacific Northwest. But
so it's true though. Those are just like the famous ones.
Oh yeah, I mean, and if you go to Vancouver, Washington, I mean, people are like nuts over there with all this Cooper stuff. So I don't know, what was the question we were talking about?
Where do you think he landed?
Oh, okay. So Battleground Orchard, somewhere down there, which is south of where they originally thought he landed. I think because when he was on the plane, he sent the stewardess up to the cockpit and said, leave me alone. But there was like a 20-minute gap. It was kind of like, what was he doing? I mean, the stairs were down. He was, ready to jump. I think he was waiting to see the lights of Vancouver, because, that would be a really good landmark of being close enough to civilization that he could use a phone or get on a bus or a train or even get back to the airport and go somewhere else, rather than landing out in the middle of nowhere. So, and he somehow seemed to know what the route was that the plane was going to be traveling, which is strange because that would not be something you or I would be aware of. But he seemed to be aware that if they were going to go to Mexico or Reno, which was on the way, that they would be traveling the Victor 23 airway is what they call it. So that's strange. So I think that's what he was looking for, were the lights there. And it was somewhere in that general vicinity, although the person who's looked into this a lot, my understanding is he's changed a little bit his ideas on where he posited, but there's no evidence anywhere. So it's not like, oh, well, we found it. I mean, there have been a lot of parachutes that have been found, oddly, but none of them so far have panned out as having any connection to the case. So other than that money, there's never been anything found of his that we know of.
Okay, though, so I really do like this theory about jumping out of the plane and just using city lights as a marker. But what would you say to somebody like Bill Rollins, who was proposing that DB Cooper jumps out of the plane and he's using the hydroelectric dam that would have been, well, in the general area as the guiding point, that he landed in or around the Lewis River, and then he took a boat to the Columbia River, and that's how the three bundles ended up there. I mean, really, I'm mostly asking about using the hydroelectric dam as the guiding point. Do you think that that's a reasonable observation, or is he way off?
Well, I mean, I've actually met him, and I'm familiar with the suspect he has, which, no offense to him, I don't think is really a viable suspect. Um, I think there have been a lot of, I'm not sure that that dam has the lights on it that everybody thought it did. I'm not as familiar with that, but my understanding is maybe it wasn't as lit up as people are saying. Um, but I am a little familiar with his suspect. And I mean, I respect the work he's done on that and everything. I just don't see that gentleman hijacking that plane.
You mean
That's,
Joe Lekich?
yes. I mean, his daughter was killed tragically in an attempted hijacking. I don't see a guy like that who lost their daughter, who was, I guess, a young woman, um, that he would put other young women in that situation of saying he was going to blow them up. I know Cooper famously said that he, had a grudge, told the stewardess he had a grudge. But I mean, by the time you get to be 40 years old, trust me, everybody has a grudge. So I don't know what that means. It could have meant anything. He could have had a fight with his wife that morning. I don't know. So I don't think that anything really fits with that gentleman. I think he suffered a terrible tragedy, and I can't imagine that he would perpetrate that kind of a crime when he lost his own daughter doing that. Because, I mean, Cooper was probably the age to be the father of these young ladies. I mean, he would have been that old. So, I mean, you have to keep that in mind of the interaction between them that might have been kind of interesting because, they're dealing with a man that maybe reminds them of their dad. I don't see him doing that, but I know he's done a lot of research on that. And again, I respect all these people that are, I mean, I'm not writing a book on a suspect, so I have to give credit where credit is due. That there's a lot of work that goes into these books. Whether or not it's means he's Cooper, I don't think so in that particular case.
Now, on that note, has there ever been a suspect that has truly pulled you in and just made you say, aha, I think this is the strongest one to date?
Definitely. Um,
Please tell.
well, there's a suspect that the FBI looked at really, really closely for decades. Um, what happened in the early 2000s when DNA started becoming popular as a tool for law enforcement? They started because there was some DNA that they got off the tie. The problem is there's 3 different males from 3 different men. So they were testing some of these suspects with this DNA and eliminating them based on them not matching the profiles. The problem is later on, the FBI came to the conclusion, we really don't know whose DNA this is, because the tie was handled by so many different people. They used to mail it from one office to another. It would be sitting on someone's desk. Nobody wore gloves back then. So yes, there is someone. The problem is we can't. Well, first of all, not only can we not put anyone on the plane, we can't even put anybody in Portland that week. That's the problem. It's really great. And I mean, I'm the first one to say that some of these suspects really bother me because, they put their names are put out in the public eye. They're on all over the internet, and they're not Cooper. And the evidence is really sketchy. I mean, some of these guys were criminals. So I don't really mind so much that their names are out there. That's not really bothering me. But some of these guys were just like somebody's dad and grandpa, and they're not Cooper. So that's been a real problem to me in this case. Other people, it doesn't bother at all. But I find that to be very distasteful, which is why I usually don't really name suspects in public, because I think they're probably not Cooper. So why would I wouldn't want anybody saying that about my dad. I know that. So that's a problem. But yes, I did spend several months looking at someone in particular. And while he's kind of a shady guy and he fit all the profile, he had the experience, he certainly had the temperament and everything else, I just couldn't put him in the right place at the right time. So I kind of gave up. I decided now the only way, like you say, to solve the case is DNA. So that's kind of where I'm putting my efforts right now.
Okay, Pat, though, at this time, I would like to just give you the floor and say, do you have any final concluding notes and observations about D.B. Cooper? Is there anything you would like to share with the Black Box Online Radio audience? Is there something that you would like to promote? Do you have any upcoming interviews or appearances? Is there anything about Cooper that we haven't talked about yet that you would like to put out there?
Well, I definitely encourage anyone. Like I said, there's a great website. It's called Norjak, NORJAK.org. Ryan Burns, who really is considered to be the premier Cooper investigator, that is his website. And it really summarizes everything. It's got the witnesses, but it's not so in depth that you're going to get bored. I mean, it's going to talk about the crime. And so I would highly recommend that. Again, I would say check out those 302s, the FBI vault. Read a couple of the books if you're interested. There are multiple Facebook groups. I mean, the biggest group is Eric Ulysses. It's called the D.B. Cooper Mystery Group. There's about 5,000 people on there. So I would suggest if you're interested, join that. I mean, at CooperCon this year, I mean, it's hard for people to attend Seattle, even though I would highly recommend it. If you happen to be in the Seattle area, it will be at the Museum of Flight. I believe it's November 15th to 17th. But they're going to have an online option this year. So for people that cannot attend, and it's not very expensive, that you can actually watch it. So that might be because you'll get to see a lot of the major players. For instance, we didn't talk about, but sitting right across the aisle from Cooper on the plane was a college student. And he's been kind enough to come to CooperCon and tell us all about that. And he paid quite close attention to Cooper because, he was a typical 20-year-old guy, and he couldn't figure out why this kind of dorky middle-aged man was paying so much attention to the attractive young stewardess. So he is a very interesting person here. So I would recommend, if you can't come, at least, and again, I getting nothing out of this other than it is a really fun event. But I would just say it's an interesting mystery. There's a lot of kids that are into D.B. Cooper. There's no dead bodies. There's no gore. So you learn about things you didn't know about before, about whether it's aviation, but there definitely are. We had several kids come to CooperCon, and it's definitely a pretty much a G-rated event, I would say. So yeah, get on the website, look at different things. There's again, I mentioned Ryan Burns earlier. He has the DB Cooper Sleuth podcast, where he also interviews a lot of people. You mentioned the Cooper Vortex, which is great. And all those episodes, they're all archived. So you don't have to listen to all of them if it's something that bores you or whatever. But there's definitely one about the money. There's several about specific suspects. If you're into, Ted Braden, or a new suspect that has popped up. His name is Skip Hall. There's a book about him. He's another really crazy character. He was involved in the Bay of Pigs and all sorts of stuff. Again, another CIA connection, which that keeps coming up. I have to say, though, my favorite thing in this, because I will just kind of end with this, is there was a gentleman who did call the FBI, and who was an FBI informant, who said that a guy came and was asking about, prior to the hijacking, asking a lot about jumping out of 727s. And it was very strange, and the FBI looked into that quite closely. But the odd part about this guy is he was the last person that Jack Ruby called before he shot Oswald. So I know there's a lot of, you talked about E. Howard Hunt. If you're a conspiracy buff, you've come to the right place. There's a lot of rabbit holes in this thing, and I have to warn you, but it's fun, and people are friendly and helpful. And I get messages myself in the DB Cooper Mystery Group. People message me all the time and ask me questions. And mostly everybody's real good about that, people that have been studying the case. So if you're new, maybe jump into one of the forums and check it out.
Okay, Pat Boland, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It was fun, Ned. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Take care.